Well, even before this budget was delivered, the federal opposition was declaring the government would be on trial for its political life. But from what Wayne Swan announced last night, it is not exactly the hard and tough budget the government had prepared us for. Joe Hockey says many of the cuts aren't actually real, but the ones that are do affect Australian families. And the Shadow Treasurer is in our Parliament House studio. Joe Hockey, welcome to Breakfast.
Good to be here, Fran.
Is this budget too generous or too harsh?
Well, you've just summed it up. It's a confused budget. I think it's lacking leadership. I think it's lacking direction. The government talked tough, but it didn't act tough. The government's cutting $2.7 billion out of defence, but it's spending $1.7 billion trying to manage the boats.
Okay, we'll put that to the Treasurer when he
Yeah,
goes.
that's right, $2 billion. And then on the other hand, they're increasing the foreign aid budget by nearly $6 billion. So these are the contradictions that illustrate that they've got no sense of direction. The government's not providing direction for Australians.
Aren't there contradictions in your criticism, though? Because on the one hand, you're criticising for the government for the size of the deficit and for not making real cuts. On the other hand, you complain it's hitting family payments, and many of those are in the higher income bracket. I mean, you can't have it both ways, can you?
Well, we're offering real alternatives. The size of the public service here in Canberra has grown by 20,000 since this government was elected. Now, we have said that we will reduce it by 12,000 as a starting point. So we are actually offering the real cuts that you have to make to get the budget back to surplus. But again, this is a government that has a confused message. It says we'll deliver a surplus in 2 years, but over the next 2 years, the deficits are going to get larger and larger.
Just the criticism you made there, you have to be careful with the comparisons you're making, though. You say a $2 billion cut to defence, but no money to stop the boats. The cuts for defence aren't going to the security elements of defence. It's cutting non-service personnel, civilian personnel.
I think you will see that there are some cuts to border protection and border surveillance. But we're getting to the bottom of that, Fran.
All right.
We're getting to the bottom
The
of that.
test you set for the budget, though, would be that it must help relieve the cost of living pressures. Now, there's money here for families with kids in schools, changes the low-income tax offset, which will put more money in people's pockets every week,
No,
more money for school uniform costs.
That's the trickery of it. It puts more money in people's pocket every week, but it actually reduces the amount they get at the end of the year. So it's actually not a tax cut. This is a trickery of the government.
No, but in terms of dealing with cost of living pressure, it helps a family to have money in their pocket every week, doesn't it?
But it's not a tax cut. This is the first budget in 8 years not to have a tax cut. So what the government's done is it's spun, for example, that families will get more every week, but it means that the lump sum they get at the end of the year is significantly less. So this is the confusion of the government. I mean, it's trying to spin a really positive budget, but at the end of the day, when you peel away the layers like an onion, you start to discover all these other things. Like for example, there's a $200 million blowout in the Computers in Schools program, which has already blown out $1.4 billion. They're giving $10 million to the unions to set up a new website. And yet at the same time, they're cutting back Australian families.
This budget is framed in the shadow of the GFC, and economists agree that the impact of the GFC is still being felt here. That's why this an extra $16 billion dollars hole in the revenue stream. It adds up to $130 billion now that revenue receipts from companies, businesses are down. I mean, the government is operating in that context. Would be unrealistic to expect that you could have a tax cut in that context.
Expenditure keeps increasing. I mean, as Cheryl Bagwell just said, they're increasing
by less than 1%.
But no, in real terms, that's above inflation. And you know what the secret is to getting a budget back to surplus, Fran? You stop spending so much money. So when the government, goes around and has to spend nearly $2 billion on managing boats, or when it starts undertaking all these advertising campaigns, which you'll be hearing about coming out of the budget last night, you can see the waste. And the best illustration of waste is they're spending $110 million more trying to mop up their pink bat mess.
They're also spending, let's talk about some of the spending measures to get your view on them. They're spending $3 billion on skills and training. Is that measures that you would support?
We will go through them. We are supportive.
We've had a fair while since the budget now. Have you been through them?
Hang on, the budget was yesterday, and I want to see parts of the legislation as well. There seems to be a lot of trials, a lot of pilot programs. I want to get to the bottom of it, but we are supportive of welfare to work measures. We are very supportive. Tony Abbott and myself have been talking about them for 6 months, and the government decided, when the tough budget rhetoric wasn't working, they decided to pick up the welfare to work line.
So in theory, the government should be able to count on the coalition's support for the changes to the disability.
We'll see the detail, Fran. I mean, look, I'm not going to pass judgment. Every time I have a good look at things, there's something new I discover.
One measure that I'm guessing you'll support is the change to stop people through trusts splitting their income, devolving it down to their kids, because you suggested a change in this area recently.
Look, again, if anyone's trying to avoid tax, we want to close that down, obviously, but if they're minimising tax lawfully, we'll have another good look at it. But again, I'm not going to give a running commentary on
minimising tax lawfully. I mean, that's what closing loopholes is about. Sometimes the laws have loopholes.
Well, there's a lot of laws, and sometimes the laws have got allow for avoidance. And
what about the loophole in the FBT on cars, which saw people driving madly around in the weeks before the 30th of June?
As I've pointed out to others in this building, that might be some in this building, but you know what? There's a lot of tradies.
Oh, come on, we're not talking about people in this building.
Well, there's a lot of tradies out there who drive from Gosford to Sydney for work, or from Geelong to Melbourne for work, or from the Gold Coast to Brisbane for work. They're the people that are going to be penalised, so far as we can see, under this initiative. I mean, everyone judges it by the middle class. Can I tell you that the senior executives who go for drives to raise their mileage are engaged? Yes, I don't mind going after anyone who's trying to rot the system, but there are a lot of genuine people out there that actually do have to drive for work.
The Greens will have the balance of power after July, which means...
Well, only if we oppose things.
Only if you oppose things. They're going to pass the mining tax, but they want to increase it. The pressure is on the coalition now to work with the government to make sure the mining profits tax doesn't get even bigger. Will you vote with the government on that to stop the Greens increasing it?
Can I tell you, we will judge the legislation as it appears, but what we've discovered is everything... if something seems to be one thing under this government, it turns to be something else, just like the budget last night.
You have said recently that the coalition could be back into surplus even before 2012-13 with no details. In the budget reply speech and this week when you give your budget luncheon at the Press Club, will you reveal how you get to a surplus?
Well, you know what? We're going to deliver a real surplus if we get the chance.
Will we get the details of how you do that?
Well, we've already outlined that. $50 billion of cuts were announced, Fran. How much more does people want us to do other than deliver the real budget? And I'd say to you, we stand ready to deliver the real budget. But with the deficits getting larger under Wayne Swan and the debt going from $94 billion to $107, and he last night described it as a tiny debt, I'd say to you, Fran, there is a mountain to climb, but we stand ready to climb it.
Okay, but this week, will we get a clear picture of what spending cuts at least you'll oppose?
Well, if the government provides us with early forms of the legislation, we'll give you an indication.
So the budget papers aren't enough?
Well, can I tell you, the budget papers aren't telling the full story.
Shadow Treasurer Joe Hockey, thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you, Fran.
Joe Hockey is Shadow Treasurer and day one of the post-2011 budget, sell or counter. And we'll be joined by Treasurer Wayne Swan after 7:30.